I thought they were joking when my mother slid the folder across the table. At first, I actually smiled, because the room felt too calm for what came next. My sister sat unusually quiet. My father had that serious expression he used when he wanted agreement, not discussion. And then he said, "This is what family does." I looked down at the folder. Medical forms. Consent paperwork. A surrogacy agreement. My name already printed on the first page. I froze. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I understood it immediately. And I couldn't believe they had already filled in my name. Before even asking me. "You can't be serious," I said. No one laughed. No one said it was a misunderstanding. My mother leaned forward. "It would solve everything," she said softly. My sister finally spoke. "We just need you to help us." Help. That word landed strangely. Because help is something you ask for. This didn't feel like asking. It felt arranged. Like a decision had been made in a room I was invited into too late. I pushed the papers back. No. Simple. Clear. I thought that would end it. It didn't. The air changed instantly. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face hardened. And my sister looked wounded, not surprised. As if my refusal was the betrayal. "If you won't help this family," my father said slowly, "don't expect to stay part of it." That sentence hit harder than the papers. Because suddenly, this wasn't about surrogacy. It was about pressure. About loyalty being tested through obedience. I stood up, ready to leave. And that's when I noticed something strange. The packet was thicker than I first realized. 4 pages. I had only seen the first. My hand paused on the folder. I flipped forward. Page 2. Medical clauses. Page 3. Compensation terms. And then, page 4. A paragraph with language so specific, so out of place. It made me stop breathing for a second. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. But I knew one thing instantly. Whatever was written there. They hadn't read it carefully. Because if they had, they wouldn't have pushed this across the table so confidently. And what none of us knew in that moment was that page 4, the page they barely glanced at, would be the reason this entire plan collapsed. And the same people trying to force me into a choice would soon realize. They handed me the very thing that would stop them. If you only saw us at holidays, you'd think we were close. The kind of family people describe as tight-knit. Always together. Always involved in each other's lives. That was the image. And my parents cared about that image. A lot. What people saw mattered. What happened privately. Much less. And that difference shaped everything. Especially the way my sister and I were treated. She was always the one protected. I was the one expected. Expected to understand. Expected to adjust. Expected to sacrifice. It rarely came as direct orders. It came disguised as responsibility. "You're stronger. You're more practical. You can handle it." Those words sound like compliments. Until you realize they're only said when someone wants something from you. My sister was emotional. Impulsive. The kind of person who made decisions first and worried later. And somehow, the cleanup often landed near me. If she needed help with money, I was asked to contribute. If she had a conflict, I was expected to keep peace. If she made a mistake, I was told not to make it worse. And because these things happened in small moments, it took me years to see the pattern. I thought I was being supportive, being a good sibling, being mature. But maturity can become a trap. When people use it as a reason to ask more from you than they would ever ask from themselves. My parents never called it favoritism. They called it family duty. That was their language. Duty. Obligation. Loyalty. Words that sound noble. Until they're used to erase boundaries. And my sister learned that language too. She knew how to turn need into moral pressure. If she wanted something, it was never framed as desire. It was framed as family. How could you say no? Don't you care about me? And if you resisted, you weren't disagreeing. You were disappointing people. That was the system. And the problem with living inside a system like that is you stop noticing how abnormal it is until someone asks for something so extreme. You can't explain it away anymore. And that's what made that folder different. Because this wasn't borrowing money or covering a mistake. This wasn't help me through a rough patch. This was my body, my health, My future. Being discussed like a family resource. And what shook me most wasn't that my sister wanted to ask. It was that my parents acted as if the answer should already be yes. As if refusal was selfish. As if consent was a formality. And sitting there at that table, looking at papers with my name already typed in, I realized something I should have understood much earlier. This wasn't the first time they expected sacrifice. It was just the first time the cost was too obvious to ignore. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. I thought saying no would end the conversation. It should have. A boundary stated clearly should be enough. But in that room, no didn't land as an answer. It landed as defiance. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then my mother leaned back slowly inside, like I had disappointed her. Not surprised her. Disappointed her. I didn't raise you to be this selfish, she said. Selfish. That word came so fast, it felt prepared. As if refusal had always been expected to become a moral failure. My sister's eyes filled with tears. Not quiet tears. Strategic ones. The kind that make everyone else rush to defend the person crying. I'm asking because I have no one else, she said. That wasn't true. But truth wasn't what mattered in that moment. Emotion was. Pressure was. My father folded his hands and looked directly at me. You benefit from this family when it suits you, he said. Now we need something from you. Need. Another word doing too much work. Because they weren't talking about helping someone move. Or lending money. They were talking about pregnancy. Risk. Months of physical and emotional consequences. And still, they spoke as if this were a favor anyone should give automatically. I stood up. This isn't a discussion, I said. My answer is no. And that's when my father's tone changed. If you walk away from this. He paused. Don't expect things to stay the same. There it was. Not guilt anymore. A threat. Subtle. But clear. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't family asking for support. This was family testing obedience. 2 days later, they called me back for what my mother described as a calmer conversation. I almost didn't go. But I wanted to believe maybe they had reflected. Maybe they understood they crossed a line. I was wrong. The folder was on the table again. But thicker. Revised. My father pushed it toward me. We spoke with a lawyer, he said. As if that made everything reasonable. My stomach tightened. Because now this wasn't emotional pressure alone. It had structure. Planning. Intent. I opened the packet. 4 pages. Medical obligations. Compensation terms. Language about schedules, procedures, expectations. Everything written with a cold professionalism that made it feel worse. Because something becomes more disturbing when it looks organized. My sister pointed to a section and said quietly, we tried to make it fair. Fair. As if this were negotiation. As if adding terms made coercion ethical. Then my father said the sentence I'll never forget. Read all 4 pages before refusing. Not consider. Not review. Refusing. As if my answer should only exist after their paperwork had a chance to change it. That's when I turned to the last page. At first, I was only scanning. Trying to get through it. Then a paragraph caught my eye. Different wording. Denser language. Legal references. A clause tied to coercion, beneficiary rights, and consequences triggered by improper inducement. I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. And a strange calm came over me. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a demand anymore. It was a mistake. Their mistake. They were so focused on getting my signature. They handed me a document they barely understood. And sitting there, while they watched me read, I realized something they didn't. The thread in this room had just changed direction. I took a copy of the agreement and left without saying much. No argument. No dramatic exit. Just silence. Because sometimes, silence protects you while you think. And I needed to think. For the next few days, I kept my distance from everyone. Ignored calls. Answered no messages. Because every conversation felt designed to wear me down. And I knew if I kept listening to their pressure, I might start doubting my own instincts. So I did the only thing that felt grounded. I read. Every page. Every clause. Every word they probably assumed I'd skim past. At first, most of it looked like dense legal language. Cold. Technical. Hard to follow. But page 4 kept pulling me back. That clause. The one that felt out of place. The one that made my stomach tighten. I printed the agreement and highlighted what I didn't understand. Then I did something no one in my family expected me to do. I took it to an independent attorney. Not someone connected to them. Not someone they recommended. Someone with no reason to protect anyone but the law. I still remember her office. Quiet. Books lining the walls. The kind of room where people bring problems they don't know how to name. She read the agreement slowly. Didn't rush. Didn't react much. Until page 4. That's when she stopped. Read the same section again. Then looked up at me. Do they know this is in here? I said, I don't think so. She leaned back. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just me feeling pressured. Something was actually wrong. She explained that the clause created exposure if consent was influenced through coercion, threats, or family pressure. And if challenged, there could be serious consequences tied to beneficiary control connected to a trust structure referenced in the agreement. I asked her to say it plainly. She did. If they pressure you into signing under threat. She tapped page 4. They may trigger consequences they absolutely do not want. I just stared at her. Because suddenly, this wasn't a hopeless situation anymore. This was leverage. Legal leverage. But more than that. Proof. Proof that saying no wasn't me being difficult. It was me protecting myself. I walked out of that office different than I walked in. Still hurt. Still angry. But clearer. Because for days I had felt isolated. Like I was defending a boundary alone. Now I wasn't alone. I had understanding. And strategy. And that changes how fear works. Fear loses power when confusion turns into clarity. That night, I went home and read page 4 again. But this time, I didn't read it like a victim trying to survive pressure. I read it like someone seeing the trap from above. And that was the first moment I realized this wasn't just about resisting their demand anymore. This was about exposing it. And once that thought entered my mind, everything shifted. 3 nights later, my mother called. Dinner. Just family. Her voice sounded softer than before. Almost careful. And that alone made me suspicious. Because in my family, softness often arrived when pressure was about to return wearing a better disguise. I almost said no. But the attorney's words were still in my mind. Know what they think they control. So I went. The table was set too neatly. Candles lit. Food arranged like a holiday. Everything about the room looked staged. Like they were trying to create comfort before reopening conflict. My sister smiled when I walked in. Too quickly. Too brightly. As if we were pretending nothing had happened. My father stood, pulled out a chair and said, "Glad you came." Not an apology. Not acknowledgement. Just a reset. And for a while, they kept up the performance. Small talk. Safe topics. Work. Weather. A neighbor's renovation. As if normal conversation could erase what they had tried to do. Then my sister said, almost casually, "We looked at cribs online." I froze. Not visibly, but inside. Because there it was. The mask slipping. My mother laughed lightly. "Your sister has already imagined nursery colors." Imagined. Like I was supposed to find that charming. Like my body had already been entered into their future. Then my father reached beside him. And brought out the folder. Again. Set it in the center of the table. Like a centerpiece. "Let's be practical tonight," he said. And just like that, the performance ended. The real purpose of the dinner stood in plain sight. He pushed the folder toward me. "Read it one more time," he said. "Then sign. Not if you're comfortable. Not let's discuss concerns. Sign." I looked around the table. At 3 people waiting for compliance. And something inside me became very still. Because this time, I wasn't walking in uncertain. I knew something they didn't. And for the first time, their confidence looked fragile to me. I opened the folder slowly. Not because I needed to read it. I already had. But because timing matters. And I wanted them sitting in their own certainty a little longer. My father folded his hands. Watching. Expecting resistance he believed he could manage. My mother leaned forward. My sister looked nervous now. Maybe because she sensed something had shifted. I turned page 1. Then 2. Then 3. And stopped at the last page. I placed a finger on the clause. Then looked up. "Have any of you actually read this section?" Silence. My father frowned. Of course we reviewed it. Reviewed. Not read. There's a difference. I slid the packet toward him. This part, I said. Read it aloud. He looked irritated. Almost insulted. But he took the pages. Started reading. The room changed before he reached the end. I saw it happen in his face. Confidence first. Then confusion. Then something colder. Recognition. My mother whispered, "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. So I did. It says if consent is obtained through coercion or improper pressure. I tapped the paper. There are consequences tied to trust assets and beneficiary rights. My sister stared. What does that mean? I held her gaze. It means if you threaten me into signing. I paused. You may trigger losses none of you planned for. No one moved. Even the room felt still. My mother reached for the paper. Read faster. Then slower. As if rereading might change the words. My father looked at me in a way he hadn't before. Not as someone resisting. As someone holding leverage. And that changed the power in the room instantly. Because the same document they used as pressure had just turned into exposure. My sister whispered, "You knew this?" "Yes." "And you came anyway?" I nodded. Because this dinner wasn't for me to be persuaded. It was for them to understand. The line had moved. And they were standing on the wrong side of it. Then I closed the folder. Gently. And said the words no one at that table expected. If we continue this conversation. I looked at page 4. We do it on my terms. No one spoke after I said it. Not immediately. Because some moments don't create noise. They create stillness. And that room had gone still. My father was still holding the papers, but not the way he had a minute earlier. Before, he held them like authority. Now, like risk. My mother kept rereading the clause as if repetition might make it less real. My sister looked between all of us, waiting for someone to tell her this was a misunderstanding. No one did. Because it wasn't. My father finally cleared his throat. This can't mean what you're implying. His voice was lower now. Careful. Less certain. I leaned back and answered calmly. It means exactly what it says. He looked offended by my tone. Maybe because it wasn't defensive. It was composed. And people who expect resistance often don't know what to do with calm. My mother whispered, "Why would this even be in here?" That question told me everything. They truly hadn't read what they were using. They had trusted the paperwork because it supported what they wanted. They never examined the parts that might limit them. And that was the mistake. My father put the folder down. This is legal language. It could mean anything. I shook my head. I had it reviewed. That changed the air again. Reviewed. By someone else. An outside voice. Not family. Not emotion. Authority. And suddenly this wasn't me interpreting a technicality. It was me arriving prepared. With a lawyer, my mother asked. Yes. No one liked that answer. Because preparation is threatening to people expecting compliance. My sister's voice trembled slightly. So, what happens if? She couldn't finish. I did. If coercion is documented. I touched page 4 again. There can be liability exposure and consequences tied to the trust referenced here. My father stared at me. Not angry now. Calculating. Because he was doing what he should have done before. Reading the risk. And for the first time in my life, I watched him realize he had overplayed control. My mother set the papers down with shaking hands. This was never meant to become this. I almost answered. But I stopped. Because the irony was too sharp. They were saying it had gone too far, after taking it farther than it ever should have gone. My father spoke next. We were trying to help your sister. There it was. The justification. The same moral cover they always used. Family. Need. Duty. But it sounded weaker now. Because page 4 had done something powerful. It stripped emotion off the argument. And left only consequences. I looked at all 3 of them. Helping her doesn't give you rights over me. No one interrupted. Because no one could. Not with that paper sitting between us. My sister looked pale. What do we do now? She asked. It wasn't dramatic. It was genuine fear. And I realized. This was the first time she understood the demand wasn't just ethically wrong. It was dangerous. My father rubbed his forehead. Then asked the question I never thought I'd hear from him. What do you want? Not what will you do? Not why are you resisting? What do you want? That question was the power shift. Because it acknowledged something unspoken. I had leverage. And they knew it. I answered slowly. First, this ends. I placed the folder closed. No more pressure. No more discussions about surrogacy. No more treating my refusal like betrayal. My mother nodded before anyone else. Fast. Too fast. As if agreement might contain damage. And second, I said, you stop calling control family. Silence again. But a different silence. Not frozen. Defeated. My father looked at the papers one last time. Then pushed the folder away from himself. A small gesture. But symbolic. Like he no longer wanted ownership of what he started. And in that moment, I understood why people say truth changes a room. Because it had. A document meant to corner me. Had forced them into reflection. A plan built on pressure. Collapsed under one clause they ignored. Page 4 didn't destroy them in some dramatic explosion. It did something more powerful. It made them confront themselves. And sometimes, that ends a bad plan more completely than revenge ever could. The first call came the next morning. Not from my mother. Not from my sister. My father. Which mattered. Because he wasn't someone who called to talk things through. He called when he wanted control. Or certainty. But when I answered, his voice carried neither. Do you have a minute? That question alone told me the balance had shifted. A week ago, he spoke in decisions. Now he was asking permission. Yes, I said. A pause. Then, I handled this badly. Not, we misunderstood. Not, you overreacted. I handled this badly. Personal responsibility. From him. It almost sounded unfamiliar. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Because silence was doing important work now. It was forcing honesty to stand on its own. We crossed a line, he added. I looked out the window and said nothing. Not to punish him. But because apology feels different. When the person receiving it no longer needs it. He asked if we could meet. I said I'd think about it. And for the first time in my life, I heard my father say, that's fair. After the call, my mother sent a message. Then another. Longer than anything she had written me in years. Not defending herself. Remembering. She wrote about times I had helped the family. Times she took me for granted. Things she should have seen sooner. There was regret in it. Not theatrical regret. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives when someone sees their behavior clearly for the first time. And my sister. Her message was the hardest to read. I didn't realize how much pressure everyone was putting on you. I thought if mom and dad supported it, it made it okay. That sentence stayed with me. Because it revealed something deeper. How easily people confuse approval with ethics. And how dangerous that becomes inside families. We met 3 days later. Neutral place. Small cafe. Public. Intentional. Because I didn't want to step back into old dynamics. My father arrived early. Another first. He stood when I walked in. Not out of habit. Out of respect. And that word would have sounded impossible to me weeks earlier. But it was there. In posture. In tone. In restraint. No one came prepared to persuade me. No folder. No arguments. No emotional pressure. Only conversation. My father said, I kept thinking about what you said. About calling control family. He shook his head. You were right. Simple words. Heavy ones. My mother cried quietly at one point. But not to influence me. Because she was ashamed. There's a difference. And I could feel it. Then my sister asked, can we repair this? Not can you move past it. Can we repair it? Shared responsibility. Again, another shift. I answered honestly. Maybe. But repair starts with respecting what I say no to. They all nodded. Immediately. No debate. And in that moment, I realized power hadn't shifted because I exposed a clause. It shifted because I stopped negotiating my boundaries. That's what changed how they related to me. Not fear. Not legal risk. Clarity. Because once people realize you won't abandon yourself to keep peace, they have to engage you differently. Or lose access entirely. When we stood to leave, my father said something I'll never forget. I spent years thinking authority meant being obeyed. I'm learning it might mean listening. I didn't respond right away. Because some sentences deserve silence. Not as rejection. As recognition. Walking away from that cafe, I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. Because this wasn't revenge. It was correction. A relationship forced to confront limits it ignored. And for the first time, respect wasn't being offered because I complied. It was being offered because I didn't. A few weeks later, I met them one last time. Not because we had solved everything, but because some conversations deserve a clear ending. We met in my parents' living room. The same room where that folder had first been pushed across the table. And walking back into it, I felt the weight of that. How one room can hold two entirely different versions of you. The one who sat there pressured into silence. And the one standing there now, not afraid to speak. No one brought up surrogacy. No one tried to reopen what had already ended. That alone told me something had changed. My mother made tea. My father sat quieter than usual. My sister looked nervous. But this time, no one was managing appearances. We were just there. Honestly. My father finally said, I keep thinking how close we came to damaging something we may not have repaired. Not losing control. Not losing an argument. Damaging trust. That word mattered. Because trust was the thing they had treated most casually. And now they understood its cost. I told them something I had rehearsed in my mind for days. Family does not mean access. They looked at me. Listening. Not to my time. Not to my choices. And certainly not to my body. No one argued. Because boundaries sound different. When people have finally learned they are real. My sister's voice shook when she said, I'm sorry I turned need into pressure. That may have been the most honest sentence spoken through all of this. Because that was exactly what happened. Need became pressure. Pressure tried to become obligation. And obligation tried to override consent. But it didn't. Because I stopped it. And that mattered. Before leaving, I took the old copy of the agreement from my bag. Including page 4. Folded from rereading. Marked with notes. A document that once looked like a threat. Now just paper. I placed it on the table. And said, I'm keeping this as a reminder. My father asked, of what? I answered, that reading carefully saved me. But saying no saved me first. Then I left. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just clear. And walking to my car. I realized closure isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's simply reaching a point where nothing more needs to be won. Because the real victory wasn't that they apologized. Or that page 4 exposed a risk. It was that I learned something I'll carry long after this story ends. Boundaries do not become wrong because people dislike them. Consent does not become selfish because family questions it. And love that requires surrender is not love. If there's one thing I'd want anyone hearing this to remember, it's this. Read carefully. Speak clearly. And never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is betrayal. If someone calls pressure love, question it. If someone treats your boundaries like betrayal, protect them harder. Because the people who benefit when you stay silent will often be the first to call your voice selfish. Don't believe them. Family does not erase consent. Guilt does not create obligation. And love does not demand your surrender. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no, and keep saying it. Because one clear boundary can protect what years of people-pleasing never could. And if the truth is sitting on page 4, read it. If your instincts say something is wrong, trust them. Because the moment you stop letting others decide what you owe, is the moment your life becomes your own. And sometimes, that is where everything changes.